May 25th, 2020, Minneapolis, USA. Police are responding to a call about a man using a counterfeit $20 note at a store. Within minutes, George Floyd will be lying motionless on the street and pronounced dead shortly after. When officers arrive, they approach George Floyd's vehicle. One pulls out his gun before reholstering it. He then drags Mr. Floyd from his car. The officers then take him over to their vehicle, parked across the street. 9 minutes after the first officers arrived, Officer Derek Chauvin shows up on scene. Chauvin had 17 previous complaints against him, which had been described as higher than normal. He had been involved in 3 previous police shootings, with one proving fatal. For the next 8 minutes and 46 seconds, Derek Chauvin would pin George Floyd to the ground, with his knee pressed into his neck.
Please, man. Please,
George Floyd told Chauvin that he couldn't breathe 17 times before losing consciousness.
Man, I can't breathe my face. Just get up.
What do you want?
I can't breathe. Please, the knee in my neck. I can't breathe.
Bro, get up, get in the car, man.
I will.
Get up, get in the car.
I can't move.
I've been waiting the whole time, man. Get up, get in the car.
Mama.
Get up and get in the car right.
I can't. My stomach hurts. My neck hurts. Everything hurts.
Even as Floyd laid motionless on the ground, Chauvin continued to keep his knee in his neck, despite desperate pleas from onlookers.
Right, y'all don't gotta put on. Right.
He is human, bro.
His nose is
What I'm saying, you can put him in the car.
The 3 other officers at the scene all looked on. Chauvin has now been charged with second-degree murder, while the 3 officers have been charged with aiding and abetting.
You assume and hope and pray that at some point the officer might take his knee off his neck, and then you watch this man die.
That person, he is a man. He is not just black, he's a man. He has family. It's someone's father, it's someone's son.
Someone who was pleading for his life. He was making it so clear that he couldn't breathe. The point that really struck me was when the pain was moving through his body, his stomach was hurting, his neck was hurting. He was promising to comply with what was being asked for and wasn't given that opportunity. And while he was still conscious and able to make that plea, those pleas were ignored, and those who were witnessing this were also trying to act on his behalf and pleading for his concerns and for him to be listened to, and he was ignored. And sadly, we witnessed a life being lost that never should have been lost.
But I guess the truth is that I've seen those images before. I know that sort of apprehension that comes in my stomach because I felt it before. So it wasn't a shock. It was just a kind of revulsion.
It was monstrous and it was murder, which could have been my brother or it could have been my nephew.
It was absolutely shocking, and the look on that police officer's face, thinking that he can get away with it.
The experiences live out in real time and as public a manner and forum as they were, weighed heavy on my wife and I. And we took the decision, despite the pandemic, to go into Boston, the nearest major city to where we live, and join the Black Lives Matter march.
As the world grappled with the murder of George Floyd, people took to the streets of cities all across the globe, sparking the biggest civil rights movement in decades. People also took to social media to protest online in a way that has never been seen before. Calls to sign petitions and for self-education consumed our online space.
I think there's more of an emphasis now. There's a bigger lock-in from people who maybe weren't connected with the campaign in the past or had a passing interest, but now it's right at the top of the social and the political agenda.
It's scandalous that the leading cause of death for young Black Americans is at the hands of the police. So I absolutely and unequivocally support those who have taken to the streets and said enough is enough.
Analysis by the Washington Post found that Black Americans are 2.5 times more likely to be shot and killed by police. In the UK, during lockdown, London's Metropolitan Police carried out 22,000 stop and searches on young black men. That's 1 in every 8 young black men in London.
They have to be willing to engage with the public. I think putting up defensive walls is the worst thing any police force and police service can do. I think they have to acknowledge where there's an issue, and then I think they have to rectify.
I remember sitting my boys down and actually having to have serious conversations about being stopped by the police and them knowing exactly what their rights were in order to avoid situations whereby, as you can imagine, they're being blind panic, they're being feared, they're feeling danger and everything by the establishment that's supposed to be protecting them.
Being stopped, as I have been a few times, it is nerve-wracking. You don't know how else it could have gone if I'd have done other things or if I'd have looked a different way or that kind of thing. So it's hard to tell.
These things happen whilst they're being filmed, so they're even aware of being filmed of what they're doing, and just still carrying on with it.
Figures from across entertainment and sport showed their support for the Black Lives Matter movement, whilst the Premier League and Formula One took the knee. The irony cannot be lost that just 4 years ago, Colin Kaepernick was essentially kicked out of America's most high-profile sports league, the NFL, after doing that very same thing.
Wouldn't you love to see one of these NFL owners, when somebody disrespects our flag, to say, get that son of a bitch off the field right now, out, he's fired. He's fired!
You know, it just feels like in this day and age, we're almost coming round to reason and the right way of thinking. The fact that he was ostracized, not just by his teammates in America for taking the knee in that symbolic move. He was, of course, also then ostracized by the game's governing body. And now we look to America, and everybody in a state of power, in a position of authority, are now taking the knee, trying to show unity and togetherness with those protesting that Black Lives Matter are also taking the knee. I mean, these are powerful images. And what it goes to show is that in the 2 years that Colin Kaepernick hasn't managed to maybe get a job or be almost reintegrated back amongst his peers, that he had the right idea all along.
As we recover from the initial shock of the murder of George Floyd and the protests die down, attention is turning to the lasting effects of what the world witnessed and how we, as a collective society, can finally and actually make a difference.
Education.
Education. Education.
Education.
Marcus Garvey has a great quote that I use all the time. A man who doesn't know who he is or where he's going is like a tree with no roots. That is so important because that's where your foundation comes from, is through the education that you get.
You've got an opportunity to talk to our youngest audiences and families to kind of eradicate this stuff longer term. Because if from a young age, you're not seeing people as being lesser than you because of how they look or how they sound, that's a great starting point. Whereas if those things are ingrained from a really young age, you're going to have a lot of work to do longer term.
I think one of the most toxic things and one of the most reasons why racism still exists is because it's passed down from parents, grandparents, aunties, uncles to kids of my generation, and I think it almost pollutes the brain.
You know, in everything we do, we should be seeking to expand and grow our knowledge on issues, and whether that's on your own history of who you are and where you come from.
I see people talking about race now, and I include my own government colleagues in this, talking about race in a way they've never talked about race before. And people wanting to not just be educated about it, but actually make a tangible difference. So I do think, and I can't put my finger on why, but I do think there's definitely, this is a game-changing moment.
A lot of people, when racial issues come up or any kind of discriminatory issues, feel scared to ask or pose a question to enhance their education because they think they might upset someone or it might vilify someone. So a safe environment is where you can ask them questions and try and learn and educate yourself in those kind of environments.
We know that racism isn't something that people are born with. It's something that is very much learnt, and we know the power of education and how that can transform lives. And we need to make sure that within our curriculum, we need to make sure that people are equipped for conversations around race, but also understanding Britain's role historically and the legacies that exist today.
They learn that somewhere and their views are shaped. So if we can get in there early and educate in as good a way as we can to knock out any form of racism from a young age, then hopefully in future generations they look back on the work Show Racism, the Red Card and others have done and see the success.
Principally, to drive this ambition for a fair and equal society, if it's driven from below, if our children, if our educators, if our adults are all beating the same drum when it comes to the anti-racism principles, then that is a step forward. So let's get it on the curriculum. Let's get our children educated, get children going home talking to their parents about these kind of things, talking about anti-racism ideas. And obviously the parents can learn as well. And I think that if we drive things from below, as much as we can rely on our government and our decision makers to drive things from above, the bit that we meet in the middle should be the happy place.
We have this opportunity now to truthfully tell those stories of our past, as bleak as they may be, as disturbing as they may be. And in this informational age, if we don't, it allows everybody to challenge everything we've learned, good, bad, and indifferent. And with that challenge, I think you open up the opportunity for all kinds of conspiracy theories to fill that void. So we have a responsibility to our young people and to our educational system at large to tell those stories truthfully and to deal and confront with them.
Britain thought that our George Floyd moment was 27 years ago with the murder of Stephen Lawrence. But almost 3 decades later, the fight is still being fought. Just because Black Lives Matter is a hashtag doesn't mean that Black lives are a trend.
We say enough is enough.
The brutal murder of George Floyd was a pivotal moment.
The time for equality is now.
Around the world, people are rising up and saying,
Black lives matter.
No justice, no peace.
Let's end racism.
George Floyd's murder will not be in vain.
400 years of injustice must end.
We need to make Martin Luther King's dream a reality.
We want a world free of racism,
where people are judged not on their color,
but the content of their character.
Red Card.